All right, welcome everyone today to our Living Greek Online annual lecture. Today, Marco Romani Mistretta will be speaking for us. He holds a PhD in classical philology from Harvard and is currently the treasurer and director of European operations at the Paideia Institute. His main research interest is the development of scientific and technical knowledge traditions in antiquity, especially physics, astronomy, and medicine. And from what I understand today, there will be at least a little bit of an ancient science connection. He has published extensively on Greek and Roman intellectual history and taught courses on the history and philosophy of science in the ancient world. So today he'll be talking with us a little more about Marcus Aurelius, and hopefully we'll be able to have a more of a deep dive into the ethics aspect of this. So take it away, Marco.
Great, thank you, Nancy. I hope everybody can hear me fine. So let me do a quick screen share. Okay, can everybody see this? Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I guess the course that you all are part of has been going on for quite a while. So you've all been reading Marcus Aurelius, experiencing the TAAHNH or meditations, as they're commonly known in English. So you probably familiarized yourself with the style of Marcus Aurelius, with the way in which he writes. The meditations tend to read like a sort of a set of journal entries, or maybe some kind of fragments or hypomnemata. So I have to kind of preface my talk by saying, just because of the nature of how Marcus Aurelius writes, it's often very hard to kind of extract any kind of systematic propositions or any kind of philosophical, general philosophical underpinnings of what he says, but we'll nonetheless try to do so today, and I hope you'll enjoy it and get something out of it. So the meditations are, of course, primarily a work of ethics. So we have to, kind of ask ourselves what the key ethical questions are, the key issues are for Marcus. Of course, in most of ancient ethics, from at least the Hellenistic period onwards, the key question, but even before, the key question is, how can I lead a good life? How to live a good life? Or how to be eudaimon. That's why sometimes people call ancient ethics eudaimonistic, right? Because the goal of it is ultimately the good life that I can lead, right? So eudaimonia. And how can I act virtuously? How can I be virtuous? Now, of course, these questions can be interpreted, can be read in various ways, and there's quite a bit of a debate going on right now in scholarship and interpretation on Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism more generally, as to whether we're dealing with a type of virtue ethics, a type of descriptive ethics, or a type of deontology, as we call it, right? So a type of normative, prescriptive ethical theory that tells you what you need to do, right? You have to do this, okay? Please, since there's only a few of us, it's a small group, feel free to stop me if, anything I say sounds weird or too complicated, or, if you want clarification on anything or want to ask a question. Now, of course, there's a relatively popular view, which is not entirely incorrect, of course, that associates Stoicism and particularly Roman Stoicism with deontology, right? With the notion of duty in particular. Think of Cicero's De Officiis, or even several letters of Seneca that we some of which we read together with my colleague David Hewitt a few weeks ago when he gave his lecture on Latin Stoicism. So this, this kind of standard account, this kind of popular view associates Roman Stoicism with the notion of duty. And so the idea is that there is a kind of imperative, if you want to think of Kant's categorical imperative with a little bit of an anachronism, right? There is something that you ought to do. There is something that you must do to be a good philosopher, to be a good Roman citizen in particular, right? Or to be a good emperor in the case of Marcus Aurelius, and of course in order to lead a good life. The other, the competing view is that Stoicism in Marcus Aurelius and other authors is in fact a form of virtue ethics. That is, it tends to be more descriptive than prescriptive. So yes, they certainly do prefer certain courses of actions over others, but that doesn't mean that Stoic ethics amounts to a set of prescriptions, right, or to a set of duties that one must perform, and rather it's more of a collection of guidelines, right, general guidelines on how to lead your life ethically, right? And what they're really getting at is to elucidate this question of what it means to act ethically, and that that the answer to that question may vary depending on the circumstances, even though we act within these kind of general guidelines. So we'll start with these two sort of competing views of what Stoic ethics it really is about in Marcus and other authors, although it's probably impossible to settle this question for Stoicism in general. So we're going to focus on Marcus in particular. And perhaps, so I'll, as the rhetoric of these things goes, I'll give away my answer immediately. My contention will be in this talk that the key to answering these questions is to explain the connection between ethics and perception theory, right? Between ethical judgment and the theory of knowledge, right? The Germans call it Erkenntnistheorie. It's usually the Germans have one word for anything, right? So it's much more practical, right? Erkenntnistheorie. We'll say theory of knowledge or theory of perception, and so on. And so the connection between ethical judgment and perception theory is really what I'm going to focus on today. And I'm going to argue that according to Marcus Aurelius, to live ethically and therefore to lead a good life, this means to first and foremost live in accordance with nature, right? Which is a tenet that goes back to early Stoicism, right, in the Hellenistic age, centuries before Marcus was born. But I'm going to argue that this life in accordance with nature and reason is basically dependent. It really hinges upon the exercise of good judgment, right? And this faculty of judgment can be trained, right? It's not something that you have. It's not something that you necessarily have innately in you. I mean, you do, but you don't necessarily. It doesn't necessarily stay the same way throughout your entire life. So you can train this, you can modify this faculty of judgment to live more ethically than you previously did. And I'm going to argue that this in turn means that you have to sort of learn how to handle your evaluations, your value judgments that you formulate based on, or that your mind formulates based on the perceptions that you get from the external world. And so the ultimate conclusion is that in Marcus Aurelius, ethical life hinges upon the judgments that we draw from impressions and perceptions, and this faculty of judgment in your mind can be bettered. Okay, so let's read some Greek. So that's what we're ultimately here for, right? So let's read some Marcus Aurelius. When philosophers in the ancient world start with haughty, start a sentence with haughty, you don't. You're probably already familiar with this. You don't necessarily need a declarative verb, a verb of saying at the beginning, right? It's kind of understood. So this haughty in and of itself basically means I'm arguing, I contend that hoti panta hypolepsis, okay, that everything is hypolepsis, whatever that means. We're going to get to that in a second. Kai haute episoi. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Epictetus, right? An author that Marcus, of course, admired very much. Epictetus has this idiom quite a lot, right? Epimoi, episoi, ephemin, and so on. So ta ephemin in Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius means the things that are up to us, whatever is in our control, as opposed to things that are outside of us, outside of our control. So everything is hypolepsis, and this hypolepsis is in your control. It's something up to you. So remove it, get rid of it whenever you so wish, and you will feel like the person who has rounded the promontory, right? And you will feel this. You will find yourself in this state of deep stillness. And think about this metaphor of galene or galini in modern Greek. The word still exists. So the galene is of course a seafaring term. It refers to deep stillness and calm on the sea. So calm everywhere and no waves in the Gulf. Okay, so. There we go. We start, this is the first passage we read together, and we start with a bunch of imperatives. Aaron, un hote temisi. Okay, Aaron, remove the hypolepsis. So it would seem that that we do have some kind of deontology here. We do have that notion of duty or an imperative or something that you really need to, that you really ought to do. And what is it that you ought to do? You have to remove the hypolepsis. Now, what is hypolepsis? That is the main question, right? So we're going to deal with that question kind of throughout this talk, because we're going to see this word a lot, and you're going to see that I rendered it in slightly different ways depending on the context, because Marcus seems to use this word a lot in different contexts, and with ever so slightly different nuances of meaning, right? So everything is perception, maybe, or impression. This is what it seems to mean here, but sometimes it also means seems to mean the judgment or the value judgment associated with that impression. And this this ultimately goes back to the Stoic perception theory, which is a key to understanding Stoic philosophy, because everything is interconnected. Remember, we as we talked about, as we said a few weeks ago in the Seneca lecture, physics, ethics, and logic are intertwined with one another in Stoic thought. So what we get from the physical doctrine, right, is the perception theory, the way we perceive things in the physical world, which of course help us understand what science is really about. But it also helps us understand how ethics works, because it helps us understand that these impressions that we get from the external world are in our control, and we're gonna come back to that. So this is again the idea of galene, the idea of the stillness and calm that you achieve once you remove the hypolepsis. Okay. Now, that, however, that operation that Marcus is urging us to perform of removing the hypolepsis is extremely difficult because it so happens that everything is hypolepsis. That is literally the only thing that there is. He's making an extremely strong claim here. He's saying that life is hypolepsis, that life is perception or impression. Now, what does that mean? That's what does he mean by saying that everything is hypolepsis? Let's read this passage, which I hope everybody can see. Okay, great. So tauta esto taduo. Keep in mind these two things. Henmen. So first, one of them is that things don't haptetai, hapto with genitive, doesn't touch. External things don't touch the soul, the psyche, but remain outside. Whereas everything that troubles us, our difficulties, okleses is another word that he's very fond of. You will have seen, and you will see the verb enokleo quite a lot. So everything that troubles you derives from the judgment within us, okay, from ekmones hypolepsios. Again, from the impression or the judgment associated with it, or both. This hypolepsis term is very, very difficult and very kind of polysemic. Heteron so the second thing you have to keep in mind is that hoti, again, hoti panta, hosa, horas, etc. So look, if you look at all these things that you have in front of you, that you see in front of you, you can see how they incessantly, they change and pass away. They come to be and pass away. So conclusion from here is that the universe is ever changing and life is perception. Now, these two things seem, at least at first glance, very different and not necessarily related to one another. Why should one say that everything is perception when you observe that the entire universe is in transformation? This is, it's a little, the thought here is a little compressed, so you kind of have to unpack it a little bit. What I think that he's sort of getting at is, remember the Heraclitean idea of pantare, that everything flows. In fact, he refers to Heraclitus quite a lot in the Meditations, explicitly or implicitly. And if you observe the ever-changing flow of all things around you, you realize that there is one thing that doesn't necessarily change, and that is the fact that you perceive, right? That you are perceiving those things, that you are the one who perceives them. So these things are all panta tauta, all these things that you see, they're out there. Remember, again, in the Stoic physical theory, in the physics branch of Stoicism, one central tenet is that everything is body, everything is corporeal. There is no such thing as, or perhaps only very few things that are incorporeal, but everything is tangible. So things do exist, okay? So things are real, they do exist out there, they're corporeal, but they're out there, right? They're not within you. They're out there, and they don't have any direct influence upon you. They don't touch your soul. So what you're actually able to relate to, what you actually can interact with, is not the things themselves so much as your perception of them, right? Your impressions and value judgments based on external things. So that seems to be what he's getting at. And of course, the central idea here is that all your problems, all your troubles, derive not from things but from perceptions and judgment. So let's look at some examples of this idea. Another passage from the Meditations where he says that other people's actions. This is a good example, right? Sometimes we seem troubled by other people's actions, and that's not true, right? That's not the correct way to look at the phenomenon of us being troubled by people's actions, because it's not those people's actions that trouble us, for these reside inside their own mind. In tois ekeinon, not in tois emois, right? Not in tois hemeterois, in tois ekeinon hegemonikois. So that doesn't concern us. These actions reside inside the hegemonic, the leading parts, right? Remember, the hegemonikon in Stoicism is the rational mind, the controlling part of the soul, the leading part of the soul. Allahai emeterai hypolepsi. So our own judgments, not their actions, but our own judgments about them are what troubled us. Okay, can people see this one? Meditations 4:7, good. Another imperative, the same one as we've seen before. Aaron, what verb is this from? Can anybody tell me? Marcello?
Airo.
Airo, right? Yeah, exactly. Aorist imperative, right? Aaron ten hypolepsin. So remove, take away the impression, and or whatever you wanna say for hypolepsis. It's pretty complicated, but remove the hypolepsis and the beblamai. This is perfect, of course. I have been hurt. I have been harmed. Will also be removed. Is also removed. Ertai. Same verb as before. Aaron to beblamai ertai hiblabi. Okay, so if you remove this thing that you tell yourself, I have been harmed. Notice the first person. Remember, these are TAAHNH helton. These are conversations that he's having with himself. So it's only the first person. If I remove the I've been harmed, this thing that I've been telling myself, then the harm itself will be removed. Iblabi, the harm. Okay. This reminds me actually of an interesting definition that I've seen for hypolepsis in this nice little book by Pierre Hadot, which I really recommend to everybody, called La Citadelle Intérieure, the Inner Citadel. It also exists in English translation. And Pierre Hadot, who's really amazing scholar of ancient Stoicism, and I really recommend reading his work. It really rewards careful study. At one point he defines hypolepsis as something like the voice inside your mind, right? The voice inside your mind that tells you something like I've been harmed, the voice inside your mind that tells you, that gives judgments, that attaches value judgments to things that happen to you. So that's the key issue is to separate these two. You have to separate those external things from these value judgments that the voice inside your mind is telling you. It's an interesting way to put it. Of course, very modern, almost kind of existentialist way to read Marcus Aurelius. But at the same time, I think it's quite fitting because notice how often he uses the first person for these things. He's really having a conversation with himself and trying to understand how his own mind works, how his own mind talks to itself. Okay. All right, so. This goes back to again, if you want to, if you're a fan of Seneca, for example, this goes back to a very old Stoic idea about passions. Although this is not something that Marcus is explicitly talking about, but if you want, this ultimately goes back to things like the theory of anger, right? That you get in Seneca's De Ira, right? You all know the famous mosaic of the slave owner beating his slave. He's clearly angry at this guy, right? So the the Stoics, especially the Roman Stoics like Seneca, would tell you that anger is a particularly deleterious, a particularly harmful passion, because when you're subject, when you kind of give yourself away to anger, you're basically surrendering your rational faculties to these incorrect value judgments about the world, right? This wrong evaluations of what's happening around you, right? So for example, this guy thinks that this guy has wronged him, has done something wrong, right? So he's attaching a value judgment to this guy's action, which is probably incorrect, Marcus would say, but that's not the end of the story. He's acting upon it, right? He's not only attaching this terrible value judgment to external things that don't even deserve it, but he's even sort of conforming his actions to that incorrect value judgment. Right? So that seems to be what ethics is about in a lot of Stoic thought, and particularly Marcus Aurelius. You kind of have to train your mind to, and particularly the faculty, the capacity that you have of hypolepsis. You have to sort of train that towards exercising better value judgments. Okay? Can people see the slide here?
Yes.
Okay, so this is from book 3. Right, ten hypoleptikin dynamin sebe, respect, almost, venerate, almost, sebo is a very strong verb here. So respect the faculty of impression or perception or evaluation and so on. So, you would make a mistake by saying, it would be a huge mistake to say, okay, all my troubles derive from hypolepsis, right? Derive from this, these perceptions and judgments that I make about things. Therefore, I just need to get rid of that altogether. Aron ten hypolepsin. It would be a mistake to interpret that as saying, just remove it completely and get rid of it and never think about, consider hypolepsis part of your life ever again. That's a mistake, because what you actually have to do is respect it, acknowledge the fact that, come to terms with the fact that you cannot know the things in and of themselves, but you can only know your impressions and perceptions of them. So literally all you have is the hypolepsis, right? So you have to first and foremost have respect for it, because it's the only thing you can really work with. And then you can start to, train this hypoleptic faculty. You can start to make it better, so that you become less likely to make incorrect value judgments about things, and start exercising your hypolepsis in a better way. So we entirely rely upon it to make sure that no impression against nature is formed in the hegemonicon, right? So no irrational perception or judgment is formed in the ruling part of the mind. And this, this hypoleptic faculty, this dynamis, really calls for, aproptosian, this freedom from error, freedom from how shall I put it? From misguided judgments is really what this is, right? Aproptosian, and oikeiosin, another extremely typically Stoic term, which is extremely difficult to translate. Appropriation or assimilation. Prosanthropos, oikeiosin, so assimilation to humankind, and obedience towards a god. So it's no easy task. Okay, so training your hypoleptic faculty is really something both difficult and very important to become a good Stoic, or a good practitioner of Stoic ethics. But once you do that, you can, once you achieve this training of the hypoleptic faculty, you can free your mind, you can liberate yourself from a lot of perissa, from a lot of superfluous, unnecessary things that trouble you. Ton enoklunton. Remember it. You remember high okleses, which he talked about before. So enokleo is the verb here. Things that vex you or that trouble you, which entirely depend upon your own judgment. So hola epite hypolepsi. Remember this, this idiom in Epictetus. So if something is epi someone or epi something, it's up to. It hinges upon that thing in the dative. So epite hypolepsi. Kaimena kai polen evruchorian. This is also an interesting compound term. You will have this vast space, eurus chora, okay, evruchorian peripoieses hede selto. Okay, so you'll make more room for yourself. You will live more freely, and you can also embrace the entire universe with your mind. Remember, the passage we read a few minutes ago about, acknowledging and perceiving the eternal kind of incessant flow of all things, right? This pneuma that permeates everything in Stoic physics. And you can conceive of, never-ending time and think of the rapid metabolism, right, of the rapid change, mutation of everything. Okay, so again, this, ultimately goes back to Marcus's penchant for Heraclitus, which perhaps not every Stoic author would share. But if you think about it, the Stoic physical theory argues that everything is permeated by this universal pneuma, and that everything is governed by this this providential kind of order. But the fact that there is order in nature, the fact that things are ordered providentially, doesn't mean that there is no change, right? In fact, quite the opposite, right? Pneuma. Remember, we've seen this a few weeks ago in the lecture about early Stoic physics. The pneuma can be fragmented. It can almost be infinitely fragmented into all things that we can see and perceive. Because of course, in Stoic physics, there isn't any such thing as an atom, right? There isn't any minimal unit of nature. So you can keep fragmenting the pneuma into every sort of any sort of scale arbitrarily small. Okay. We're almost done, I promise. But I wanted to conclude with a few positive notes, because we've been talking a lot about what Marcus thinks is wrong in moral behavior and moral psychology, really. But what is the goal? What is the positive aspect of it? Well, he says your technique, your craft, the art, the craft that you have to exercise is to be good, to be agathon, to be virtuous. And how else are you going to achieve this if not through ektheorematon, through some kind of intellectual study, both about perites tu holu physeos, about the nature of the universe. So again, science, physics in particular will help you lead a more ethical life, because it will help you understand how the universe works and how we perceive it. Right? So both about the nature of the universe and the inherent character of the human constitution, really, kataskewi, right? Of the human condition or structure, really, the structure of the human being. So the external world and the way you relate to it, the way you perceive it and form judgments about it. These two things are what you need to know, and they're all you need to know in order to lead a good life. This is quite a powerful thought to conclude on. And of course, just to give due credit where it's due. Of course, I'm not saying that there is no trace of deontology in Marcus. Quite the opposite. And there's even a very recent book that came out this year called the Invention of Duty, which I would recommend. That makes a very compelling case for reading Stoicism as a kind of deontology. I don't necessarily agree with everything in it, but I think it's it does make a good case. And of course, you do have passages like this one where the two approaches seem to be kind of combined. So the perception approach, the psychological approach, and the deontological approach. So he says, by nature you can tolerate everything that the hypolepsis in your mind, the hypolepsis has the power to make sufferable, to make tolerable by representing it, katafantasian, by giving it some representation in the form of something useful or dutiful, or some by representing it under the guise of some duty that you have to perform. So that's how you get all the statements that Marcus makes over and over again about, for example, at the beginning of book 5, there's that famous passage, which I purposely didn't include in my selection because it's so famous, when he says, when you, sometimes you have difficulty getting out of bed in the morning, right? So if you find it difficult to get out of bed in the morning, think about your duty, right? Think about the fact that you're getting up and getting out of bed in order to perform the duty that has been assigned to you. Right? Okay. So, you do get a lot of references to duty kathekein, kathekon, and so on in Marcus Aurelius. Of course, he's very self-conscious about the responsibility that he has as a universal emperor of Rome, and he goes on and on about what it means to be a good ruler and to do your duty as a Roman citizen, and so on and so forth. But this is because this is ultimately because you eventually get to that point in your training of the hypoleptic mind that you can represent certain things as your duty, right? That you can attach certain value judgments to your impressions that make them look like that's what you have to do. Huh? So you don't like getting up and going to the Senate meeting because it's so boring and whatnot. But that's your duty, right? That you have to sort of train your mind to represent that as something dutiful, part of the duty of a Roman citizen. Right? That's perhaps a somewhat silly example, but you get the idea. Okay, so that's about it. Ultimately, I've argued that duty is not quite as crucial, not quite as central in Marcus's thought as the recognition, really the discipline and the training of how the impression and perception and how the hypoleptic mind really works. So in other words, leading an ethical life requires training this part of your mind to exercise correct judgments and attach the correct value to each thing. So yeah, here's some suggestions for the reading, some of which I've already mentioned, and I'll pause here and ask if anybody has any questions.